Peter Gøtzsche ankündigen darf. Er ist Leiter des skandinavischen, würden wir auf Deutsch sagen, Cochrane Center, das Nordic Cochrane Center in Kopenhagen. Er ist der Fachwelt schon lange bekannt als einer, der sehr, sehr intensiv sich die Daten angeguckt hat, was wissen wir, was funktioniert nicht. Und in letzter Zeit ist er eben auch einer größeren Öffentlichkeit bekannt geworden durch die Bücher, die er schreibt, zuletzt Deadly Medicines, tödliche Medikamente, das auch auf Deutsch erschienen ist. Und ich freue mich jetzt, Peter Gøtzsche, it's your turn.
Ja, vielen Dank für diese Einführung. Ich spreche nicht so gut Deutsch, deshalb will ich sehr gerne Englisch sprechen. Yeah. So, that will be in this language. I have no conflicts of interest. Yeah, it is important to say this in Germany, I understand. We use terribly many drugs. In Denmark, 8 million daily doses, which means that every Dane can be in treatment with 1.5 drugs from they are born till they die. That cannot be healthy, and it isn't healthy. 1 of 8 get at least 5 drugs every day. Arthritis drugs, 1 of 8 get 1 every year. Antidepressants, we take so many antidepressants that each of us can use them for 6 years of our lives. We are called the happiest nation on earth, despite the fact that we take so many antidepressants. They don't make you happy. I'll explain that a little later. Now, the sales of antidepressants reflect very closely the number of drugs on the market. They don't reflect a genuine need. And why? Because every time a new drug comes on the market, there is a new sales force that is traveling around telling the doctors, use antidepressants for everything, for broken marriages, for a failed exam, for stress, whatever. And that is what the doctors do. Now, psychiatry is particularly bad. I call it healthcare's worst disaster area. Is there a pill I can take to feel better about the pills I already take? This is terribly true for psychiatry, because many pills give you symptoms that look like other psychiatric diseases. Then the psychiatrist will tell you, now you not only have depression or ADHD, you are also bipolar, because these drugs have stimulant effects. And what about if a psychiatrist receives a person from the street in an LSD or hashish or cocaine psychosis? Would they say, you have schizophrenia? They would not. Then why do they diagnose new psychiatric disorders in people whose brain are already under influence? This is insane. And this is why so many psychiatric patients have many diagnoses and many drugs which harm them to such an extent that psychiatric drugs, I have estimated, are the 3rd leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. So my previous estimate that all prescription drugs are the 3rd leading cause of death is probably too kind, because psychiatric drugs kill an enormous amount of people. Now, I told you about this terrible mass killing. What about if our drug epidemic had been a microbial epidemic? Once I was in the States, they talked about 1 case of Ebola in Houston in Texas for 2 weeks in the news, and I think that that person survived. 1 case. They don't talk about the 200,000 they kill each year by their prescription drugs. They are anonymous. You don't see the killings, because if a person suddenly drops dead because of a heart attack, you don't know it was the drug that killed that person. You need statistics for that. So it doesn't come in the news. Now, the drug industry should be the most ethical of all industries, but it's actually the worst. Part of its business practices fulfill US law criteria for organized crime. I have written some of the things here: extortion, fraud, and so on. And Pfizer, the world's biggest company, was convicted of organized crime and a conspiracy by a jury. The other big drug companies have settled, because then they can do like in Tour de France. I am not caught taking EPO, but you all know they all did it. So that's pretty smart of them. So compared to other industries, the drug industry is the biggest defrauder of the US federal government under the False Claims Act, which basically means you are lying. In the United States, drug companies have more than 3 times as many serious or moderately serious law violations as other companies, even if you adjust for the company size. And they also have a worse record than other companies for international bribery and corruption. I was stunned over lunch because I told a colleague here that Frank Montgomery, the chairman of the German Medical Association, he approves of bribery of German doctors. There was a case a couple of years ago, and he found it quite natural that it's their own business to be bribed. That's common. So they get money for prescribing certain very expensive drugs that are often more harmful than cheaper drugs. This is terrible. I am stunned that you accept this in Germany, and that you re-elect a person like that for your medical association. I wrote about him in my book, Organized Crime. Now, Pfizer, the world's biggest company, has entered some corporate integrity agreement with the US Department of Health and Human Services, and that means you will behave like a good boy for the next 5 years. While Pfizer was signing this agreement, they actually was busily illegally marketing drugs illegally, which they signed an agreement about that they wouldn't do that in the future. They don't care, because even the big billion-dollar fines is a small fraction of the income. And when crime pays, there will be more crime. And I describe that in my book as well. The crimes have increased, and we know most about it in the United States because they are more open about their crimes. In Europe, we tend not to speak so much about them. Now, a person I admire a lot is David Graham, who has worked with drug safety at the American Drug Agency for a lifetime. And he says that the way the FDA approaches safety is virtually to disregard it. There is no risk that cannot be managed after the drug has come on the market. So what they say is, we can't be 95% certain that this drug won't kill you, so we will assume it doesn't, and then they let it on the market. Now, I'm a specialist in internal medicine. Imagine if I told a patient, I can't be 95% sure that this drug will kill you, so go home and take it. That would be a great doctor, wouldn't it? So the FDA approved Vioxx exactly for this reason, because they lacked complete certainty that the drug increased cardiovascular risk, although everybody knew that it must cause heart attacks based on the molecular mode of action. Everyone knew it, but the FDA didn't tell Merck, show us how many people you kill. It just needed 800 people in the age group that take arthritis drugs, just 800, and they would have shown that this drug is deadly and it would never have made it to the market. But they don't require these things in drug agencies. They don't protect us, really. I have estimated that Vioxx has killed 120,000 people in this world, and that celecoxib, which is still on the market, has killed 75,000 up till 2004. And I told you how many arthritis drugs we take, even in Denmark, for all sorts of things. A tennis elbow, back pain. Isn't it foolish to die of a myocardial infarction because you have a tennis elbow? I think it is. Now, FDA have fake fixes, and your regulator has fake fixes. And by this I mean all the many warnings and precautions that come with every drug. There can be 20, 30 or 40. No doctor can master all this. We don't know about them. And we cannot even use warfarin safely. We all know that warfarin is dangerous. You can die from bleeding if you eat cabbage or use other drugs that interact with warfarin. So every doctor knows, look up other drugs if you have a patient on warfarin. Yet, one study showed that 1/3 of patients were in treatment with contraindicated drugs while they were on warfarin. Another study showed 2/3 were on them. We doctors cannot even use warfarin safely, so what can we do? This shows that all these warnings FDA come with, they don't work. Very many drugs prolong the QT interval, which means that people can suddenly drop dead. Did I, as a specialist in internal medicine, ever look up the drugs I used to see if they prolonged the QT interval? I frankly admit to you, I never did that. And in psychiatry, both antidepressants and antipsychotics prolong the QT interval. Very many people are in treatment with both types of drugs because, as I told you, if you get an antidepressant and you get a little manic, then the psychiatrist will tell you, oh, now you're bipolar, you need an antipsychotic as well. And then some of them drop dead, and you don't realize this. This is called a natural death in psychiatry if you suddenly drop dead. I'm not kidding. It's called a natural death, even if it's a girl of 30 years of age. Okay, so what about all this selective reporting? Only half of all drug trials are ever published. And in those that are published, half of the data are missing. So what we see is only 1/4. And that quarter is, of course, carefully selected to fool us. So we can't trust the published literature, not at all. We need access to the clinical study reports from the European Medicines Agency, which I succeeded in 2010 after having complained to the European Ombudsman. We couldn't get them. And then I complained to the Ombudsman. It took 3 years, and this caused the EMA to change its policy drastically. They simply had to. They were only interested in protecting the drug industry's commercial interest. They didn't care that I explained to them that all this secrecy kills an enormous amount of patients. They didn't care. And what about randomized trials? We regard it as the best science we have. This is not science. It's pseudoscience. When we cannot get access to the raw data, it's pseudoscience. If astronomers have a big telescope like the Hubble telescope, then an observation may only be done once, but then they share the data with each other so other researchers can see, was it correct or was it not correct that there was a new planet out there? While in healthcare, the data are concealed, particularly by the drug company, because they manipulate their data before they publish them. So when we're not allowed to see the data and look for ourselves, it's not science, it's marketing. Marketing-based medicine, I call it, not evidence-based medicine. Now, we got access to trial protocols in Denmark more than 10 years ago. We were the first, I think, in the world that got access to this anywhere. And this was very revealing. We compared the trial protocols from ethics committees with what was published after the trial was done. And I will not show you everything, just a few things. As expected, when outcomes were reported fully, so that they could be used in meta-analysis and so on, that was when the outcomes favored the interesting treatment, both for benefits and harms. So again, we are fooled. We could show that here. But the worst thing was that the primary outcomes, which are very important because these are the outcomes you use for calculating how many patients do I need not to overlook an important effect. You use it for power calculations. So primary outcomes were actually often changed between the protocol and the publications. Changes to a protocol-defined outcome occurred in half of them. New publication-defined outcome came out in the blue in the publication in 1/3. Change in power calculation outcome, any inconsistency in 2/3 of the trials. None, not a single of the 102 publications acknowledged that the authors had modified their primary outcomes. This is cheating. If I am going to demonstrate to you that I'm a sharpshooter and somebody puts something over my eyes and I shoot blindly against the target, and before I shoot, some helpers have made a lot of other targets. So then I hit close to the bullseye in one target, and then they remove all the other ones. And then you're called in and see how a great shot Gøtzsche is, even blindfolded. That's what changing your primary outcomes is about. You miss the target, but you change the outcome afterwards. So, now I'll turn a little into psychiatry because it's absolutely horrible what happens there. So, This is not to advertise my new book, but I'm publishing a book about psychiatry in September, and it will also come in German later, so you will hear about it, because the psychiatrist will be intensely dissatisfied about it. But let me first explain why antidepressants don't work for depression. It sounds foolish, doesn't it? But actually they don't. The FDA made a huge analysis some years ago of 100,000 patients, and half of the patients had depression, and these were placebo trials. 50% responded on drug, 40% on placebo. Please note that the 40% in the placebo group, this is not a placebo effect, because if you had done absolutely nothing, most people would have gone better after some weeks. That's not an effect of a pill with nothing in it. Nature cures, and the doctor takes the payment. This is a citation from Voltaire, the French philosopher. So it's not a placebo effect. It's not the effect of a pill with nothing in it. So this is a pretty small effect, and it's measured on highly subjective scales like the Hamilton's Depression Scale. So one of my researchers collected trials in a variety of disease areas that had both a blinded and non-blinded outcome assessor, because he wanted to see how much does a non-blinded assessor exaggerate the effect. And of course, most trials that use subjective outcomes, we found the effect was exaggerated by 36% on average by the non-blinded observers. Why do I tell you this? Yes, because psychiatric drugs have clear side effects. So these trials are not well blinded. Most doctors and patients will have guessed whether it's active drug or placebo given to a particular patient. So they are not truly double-blinded, these trials. That's why I show you this. So if I use this correction factor and assume the blinding has been broken in all patients, there will be no effect of antidepressants. Of course, I don't assume that the blinding is broken in all patients, but here comes a very, very interesting Cochrane review. Because of this unblinding problem, in the old days, in the 60s, people put something in the placebo that gave people side effects, namely atropine. It's an anticholinergic substance that gives you dry mouth and blurred vision and perhaps constipation and so on. So now it is difficult to know who got active drug and placebo. And there were 9 trials, and the drugs were tricyclic antidepressants. And I'll not show you all this, I'll just show you the effect corresponding to 1 on the Hamilton Depression Scale that goes up to 52. So that's nothing. The least effect that a person can perceive is 5 to 6. That's the bare minimum that can be perceived on this scale. So 1 is nothing. And the bare minimum that you can perceive that there is a small change now in the depression. That's not clinically relevant. You need more than a small change. You need to get people back to work, you need to save their marriages and so on. The trials tell you absolutely nothing about this. More than 1,000 trials have been done compared to placebo. I haven't seen a single one with an important outcome. It is these foolish scales we see all the time. And why are the trials old? That's because the drug industry isn't so foolish that it makes active placebos. Because then we all could see that the emperor has no clothes for a lot of our drugs. So they don't do this. So it seems likely to me these antidepressants don't work for depression. Many patients and doctors think they work, but that's because they forget about the natural cause of the disease. Most people get better in some weeks, even if you do absolutely nothing. And then you think it's a drug. And they actually cause sexual problems in half of those who didn't have sexual problems before they started. Is it then likely that they help saving intimate relationships? I'm not so convinced about that. And here is a very revealing graph. Trials of fluoxetine or venlafaxine against placebo, sponsor-conducted trials, so these are biased. There was not atropine in the placebo. These are really biased in many ways. But even though they were biased, look what happened. You started with severely depressed patients with a Hamilton score of 21. Then, week by week, the patients became better, a little more quickly on active drug than on the placebo. But how large is the difference if you look at the vertical scale? It's about a week. So if you do absolutely nothing, you just take a week more, then you come down to being mildly depressed. So you just need to be patient and talk to the patient. And by the way, psychotherapy works for depression. So why give people drugs that actually increase suicides in children and young people, and that leads to an enormous amount of death in old people because they lose balance and fall and break their hip, and then 1/4 or 1/5 they die? This is one reason why antidepressants kill so many people. That's because they kill so many elderly people that fall. They fall on antidepressants, they fall on benzodiazepines, they fall on everything, almost. Every brain active substance, at least. Here is a graph that shows you that antidepressants are addictive, just like benzodiazepines. There is a lot of documentation for that. These are data from Finland. If you put 100 people in Finland on an antidepressant drug, then follow them year by year, then after 5 years, almost half of them still get an antidepressant drug. Is this the natural cause of a depression? No. Before we had antidepressant drugs, most people got well after 6 to 9 months, and not so many got a relapse. What this illustrates is that people can't get off the drugs. Half of them have difficulty getting off the drugs. The psychiatrist will tell you, no, they don't give you dependence. But what about if you ask the patients? They tell a very different story. So whom should you believe? The psychiatrists, who benefit from telling you, oh no, it's not like the benzodiazepines, or the patients who can't get off the drugs? I know whom to believe. Now, suicides have been vastly underestimated. This is also about that you cannot trust randomized trials. In the big FDA analysis, there were just 5 suicides in 50,000 patients on active drug. That's 1 per 10,000. I have, in my new book, more suicides in fewer people, and these trials were actually part of the FDA analysis. How come there could be 9 suicides in just 7,000 patients on fluoxetine when fluoxetine was included in the FDA analysis? What happened to the other 4 suicides? They disappeared. And Thomas Logren, who was in charge of the big FDA analysis with only 1 suicide per 10,000, 5 years earlier he published his own study also using FDA data, and now there were 10 suicides per 10,000, namely 22 in 22,000 on drugs. So how can there be 10 times as many suicides? So what I estimate is there should have been 15 times more suicides in the FDA analysis than there were. That's an error of 1,400%. So the FDA is protecting the drug industry, and one of the ways they did that was that only events that occurred within 24 hours after stopping drug were included. But what happens after 24 hours when the trial is over? You get abstinence symptoms. These abstinence symptoms predisposes to suicide. And I'll show you in the next slide. But first, there are 2 major flaws in psychiatric drug trials. You take patients in treatment, then you have a short washout period, then you randomize to placebo or another such treatment, which means you introduce withdrawal symptoms, cold turkey symptoms in the placebo group. And they can be depression and psychosis and so on. And then you conclude, yes, I have a good drug. Of course I have, because I harmed the placebo group. Virtually all trials in psychiatry are done in this way. And also, they ignore events after the randomized phase was over. That's another big flaw. And you can see in the FDA analysis of sertraline, Zoloft, in adults. This is not children, it's adults. Suicides and suicide attempts. They found that sertraline don't increase suicides in adults. Relative risk around 1. But when Pfizer looked at their own studies, they found that sertraline protected against suicides in adults. Don't worry about the confidence interval, just look at the point estimates. But Pfizer was careless here, because they also presented an analysis where they included events up to 30 days, and not just 24 hours after people came off the drug. And what happened now? 50% increase in suicide and suicide attempts. So they went from a protection from their drug to a harmful effect on their drug, just by following up patients after they came out of the randomized trial phase. And then there's a UK analysis that shows a doubling of suicide events using UK regular data. David Healy has had access to internal company documents in US court cases, and he has published that if a suicide or suicide attempt happened in the washout phase before people were randomized, then it was added to the placebo group because the people didn't get an active drug. And if there was a suicide after the trial was over, oh, they didn't get an active drug, so it was transferred to the placebo group. This is fraud. Both Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline and Eli Lilly did this. Then I shall end soon, but just say a little about it's legitimate to ask, for how long shall I continue with a psychiatric drug? So psychiatrists have made many maintenance studies where patients have become well, then you randomize to placebo and continue treatment, and then you conclude, yes, they need to be treated forever. Why? Because you introduced cold turkey in the placebo group. You harm the placebo group, and they believe in these studies, the psychiatrists, they do. So a few remaining remarks, and then I'll finish. Now, do small effects exist? No, they are likely biased. We have small effects all over healthcare, and we use drugs for them. Now, I have some examples like urinary incontinence. There is a Cochrane review of 12,000 patients, and when you have so many patients, anything gets statistically significant. So, of course, it worked, and the author concluded it worked, and it improved symptoms. But what was the effect? Well, the largest study found that the number of leakage episodes per day was 3.2 on drug and 3.3 on placebo. The number of Ps per day was 10 and 11. It doesn't take much unblinding to get such results. And these drugs give you side effects. So you skip one visit to the toilet because you know I'm on active drug. This is crazy. You shouldn't use these drugs because they have harms, like all drugs have. What are the harms? A lot of harms. Dry mouth, blurred vision, constipation, confusion, dry eyes, dry nose, serious harms. You must call your doctor immediately. Difficulty urinating, rash, hives, itching, difficulty breathing or swallowing. Well, why use such drugs? They should be taken off the market for urinary incontinence. Now I have another one, which is very popular now. All these demented people. What about cholinesterase inhibitors? Well, another Cochrane review, 7,000 patients. Yes, it works. But how much? 3 points. How big is the scale? 70. You remember the Hamilton from before? That was 1 out of 50. So 3 out of 70, what's that? It's nothing. It's unblinding, probably. Lack of blinding. And of course, the study clinicians, they were positive towards the global clinical state and all that sort of thing. So the author concluded carelessly that these drugs are efficacious. There you have it. But what is it they do? Well, they have a lot of harms. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And what did the patients think? 29% left the treatment groups before the trial was over on account of adverse events. How many left the placebo groups? 18%. So they felt the adverse events. And what are the most common adverse events of donepezil, for example? Nausea, diarrhea, not sleeping well, vomiting, muscle cramps, feeling tired, not wanting to eat. Great, isn't it? Just what we need for old people who already have these problems, that they can't sleep well and they feel tired and all that. Oh yeah, we'll give them a little more with drugs that don't work. We could save millions by not using these foolish drugs. And if you don't believe me, put something in the placebo so that they're adequately blinded. And I'm willing to bet a big amount of money that these trials will show that they don't work. So this is the last slide. The Cochrane review omitted the biggest trial ever done, 565 patients, I believe for no good reason. Actually, it was published in Lancet, and they had long-term outcomes after 3 years. They were similar with respect to coming into an institution, progression of disability and behavioral and psychological symptoms. The biggest trial showed that these drugs don't work, even though they weren't adequately blinded. Donepezil is not cost effective. No, it certainly isn't. Shouldn't use that. Whew. Yes. So don't take drugs unless you absolutely need them. They might kill you.
Wir haben Zeit für ein paar Fragen, falls es welche gibt. Widerspruch, Kommentare?
Man kann auf Deutsch fragen.
Man kann auf Deutsch fragen, ich übersetze und er redet zurück und ich übersetze wieder.
Ja, das ist nicht notwendig.
So I'm Chris Kessler from Berlin. I expect on international conferences you're meeting a lot of people from the pharmaceutical industry. What's the stereotyped response to your argument?
I don't come at venues where pharmaceutical industry people come. I go to other meetings.
Like the physicians, what you say? Because if I'm a psychiatrist, even for me, it's really, I read your book. But still, if I hear it again, it's a disaster for medicine, what you say.
It is. It is. That's why my wife is a bit tired of me writing so many books. I have written 3 books in 3 years, first about mammography screening, then about the crime industry, which I call the drug industry, and now about psychiatry in September. And I've been through a lot of material, and I think it will be very difficult to argue against this book. So I am kind of trying to change psychiatry completely. This psychosocial biological disease model has degenerated into a biological disease model where they say you suffer from a chemical imbalance in your brain and we have a drug to fix it. This is a lie. There's no chemical imbalance, but you create one, which is why it's difficult to get off the drugs. So it's an incredible disaster what we are witness in psychiatry right now. And I meet very few people who cannot tell me that one close to them have been ill-treated by psychiatry. So we need to not reform this specialty, we need to revolutionize it.
I still think about your last sentence, so what can I make out of it? If you tell the patient only take drugs if it's really needed, how does he know that this drug helps him? So for example, you spoke about antidepressants, but what if, for example, about diabetes? The diabetes industry will say, of course, in our case, we have the thing, there's nothing else available, and you can't wait, and so on and so forth. So there are other indications where it makes it. But the major question is, how can the patient know?
Well, not even diabetes is easy. Tolbutamide, a very old drug, actually killed people. It wasn't taken off the market. Rosiglitazone kills people. It was taken off the market in Europe, but in America, where they have a corrupt FDA, they kept it on the market. So even diabetes isn't easy. If people need insulin, it's easy. Everybody knows. There are other things that are easy. But the difficult thing is for patients to know when not to take drugs. You are absolutely right. And what I recommend patients is, although it's very burdensome and difficult to understand, then go and read the package inserts on the internet. Because if you read, I remember I was a biologist before I became a doctor, and I started working in the drug industry. And the first time I read a package insert for an anti-arthritis drug, because I was doing research on that drug, then I thought, good heavens, I will never take an arthritis drug. It can kill me in so many ways. And I can live with my pain, but I might die from the drug. So people should realize that our drugs are generally dangerous and that our drug agencies don't protect us sufficiently. People need to know this. And then ask themselves, wouldn't I be reasonably okay if I didn't take a drug? And in many cases you would actually. And this idea of treating 200 people to benefit one, all this prophylaxis thing with cholesterol and hypertension and all that, I mean, all the others don't benefit. They just get the side effects, and they might get tired and lose their sex drive and all sorts of things. Is it worth it? We're all going to die anyhow. I think we need to look differently on drugs than what we do. It's totally controlled by the drug industry.
Yes. Would it be a solution to use predictive factors in an individual?
Yeah.
Because apparently these are all statistical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you an anecdote I'm not so proud about. One of my best friends smoked cigarettes. He went to his doctor and they went through his algorithm, what was his cholesterol, his blood pressure, and now he was a cigarette smoker. And since everything else was okay, he could see in the algorithm, okay, it's not so good to smoke, but after all, it doesn't increase my risk so much of dying because the other factors are okay. So I'll continue smoking cigarettes. Luckily, he has given up now. But this algorithm can be very helpful because if you just have a slightly lower cholesterol, why on earth should you take a statin? I would never do it. Many people get muscular problems and can't walk 18 holes of golf, for example. No, I wouldn't. I even don't know what my cholesterol is.
What is your point of view regarding non-pharmacological studies, randomized research like psychotherapy or exercise or nutrition? You will never have complete blinding or absolutely no blinding. Would you also criticize it and say?
No. Some treatments cannot be blinded. This doesn't mean that they are useless. You just have to accept they cannot be blinded, and then you can have a second observer who doesn't know what happened, for example, and try to blind it that way. And when you talk about non-drug interventions, I absolutely agree with you. I have a colleague who is a specialist in internal medicine like me in California. Very early in his career, he realized, I'm treating hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, I'm treating diabetes with drugs, with pills. I'm treating all these things with pills. But what about if I learned my fellow Americans to eat better and lose weight? Then they could get off all these drugs. So he has devoted his entire career. He and his wife have published cookbooks, and they have courses for the general public and even doctors that come and eat vegetarian food. It was a bit difficult for me because I missed my meat and when I was there and visited him. But his son is also a specialist in internal medicine, and he's very popular with Kaiser Permanente because he takes so many people off their drugs by learning them to eat better so they lose weight and they don't need the drugs anymore. I mean, we're more or less doing the wrong things because the drug industry steers us.
I have a question. A couple of months ago, a book has been published from Naomi Oreskes, as you might know. She's a Harvard professor, a geologist, and she wrote about how the tobacco industry and the energy industry succeeded in, was heißt denn vernebeln? Blurring the fact that smoking caused lung cancer and
Emergence of doubt.
And the so-called
oh yes, I know. Oreska, I have read the book.
Yes, and she very precisely describes how the system works.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, there are the pharmaceutical industry who have their specific interest. But the point is, why does it work? Why is nobody trying to avoid, to stop this kind of action? And there is a system behind. And she very clearly described this guy Singer, who was one of the guys who in Los Alamos was involved in the atomic bomb, and all these physics who were very close friends of Reagan and anti-communist. and all these very conservative guys who, and what I found very interesting, they didn't get money for doing this.
Yeah.
They were just convinced that they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think there must be another thing, another system behind the fake
Yeah.
studies and everything.
Yeah.
And
You know,
yeah,
yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, let me explain. In healthcare, which should be the most ethical of all professions, because it's about life and death and our illnesses, it doesn't matter so much what is right and wrong. What matters is who holds the power and who has the money. That's what matters the most. And the good thing is that there is a counter movement on its way. People have had enough. Also because of the extortion, that when the drug industry gets monopoly on a new drug, then they charge so much for it that we can't pay for it. It's just like Somali pirates. When they take hostages, they think, how many millions can we get per hostage? That's the same the drug industry does. There is no upper limit on it. So in reality, we should have public development of drugs. It should be a public enterprise and not a capitalistic enterprise, because there is a monopoly. There isn't a true price competition. Absolutely not. And we taxpayers, we subsidize this circus. This is ridiculous.
I get a question for my daily practice. There's a patient and she's suffering from depression, which I diagnosed, and I don't prescribe her an antidepressant drug. There are guidelines, which are in Germany really, the lawsuit is about the guidelines. And if I violate the guidelines, what shall I do? So this is the thing I think. I would like to stay people off medicine, off the drugs, but if I should, because it's common sense, what shall I do?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. First of all, guidelines are exactly that. Guidelines are just guidelines. You can not adhere to the guidelines if you have a good explanation. So be careful and write your good explanation in the patient files, and you will be pretty safe. And one way of convincing a patient not to take an antidepressant drug is to talk to that patient about all the terrible harms that come with these drugs, and also that maybe they don't even work, because it's all bias. So if you have a conversation with the patient about that and also explains that psychotherapy actually works, I think you'll be pretty safe. I have discussed this with many people.
And quoting Gøtzsche 2015 would be a good explanation in the patient record.
Well, I'm not some sort of oracle in Delphi. You know, you just have to come with your good reasons. Then you can do it.
It's the same for hypertension or anything else?
Yeah, I believe it is. When I was a specialist in internal medicine, I didn't use that many drugs. And if a patient desperately wanted a drug that I thought was a bad idea, then I always started to discuss side effects. And it usually worked well.
Warum muss man die Industrie anschuldigen? Die bewegt sich doch wie ein Fisch im Wasser. In den gebotenen Paradigma und in die gebotenen Guidelines bis, also die sind halt noch ein bisschen schlau und benutzen das Wasser, während die anderen alle nur drin schwimmen.
Why would we have to accuse the pharmaceutical industry? They are just like fish in the water. All they do is they swim in the water while and they know how to swim better than the others. Why accuse them?
Oh, that was a tough question. I mean, if people do wrong things, shouldn't we tell them you do wrong things? I mean, what kind of society would we have if we didn't fight people doing wrong things? I mean, the drug industry could be ethical. I have discussed it with them. If you all decided between you to be more ethical and not use these dirty methods, then you would compete at another level, a more ethical level. But what happens now is that everybody seeks the ethical bottom, because that's where most of the money is. But I can follow you so far that we have, as a society, we have made it a fertile ground for criminals to swim in the water, as you say. So we haven't done our job. But it's difficult to do our job when the industry is so wealthy that they can buy everybody. And they have bought everybody, including up to ministers of health in some countries. How can we fight a system? How can we fight a system like that? That's as if the Mafia has become too powerful and have bought everybody. The chief of police, the mayor, everyone. What will you do with a city like that? It's very difficult, and that's where we are today with the drug industry.
Sounds like a good closing statement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.